Why inmates fear ADX Florence, inside America's most dangerous supermax prison. The fortress in the Rockies. Deep in the desolate mountains of Colorado, surrounded by empty plains and razor-sharp fences, stands a place unlike any other on Earth. Officially, it's called the United States Penitentiary Administrative Maximum Facility. But to those who've been there, or even heard the whispers, it's known by another name, ADX Florence, the Alcatraz of the Rockies. From the outside it looks calm. The sky is blue, the mountain air is thin, and the concrete walls reflect the bright Colorado sun. But beyond those layers of reinforced steel and electronic surveillance lies something far more terrifying than violence. Absolute isolation. It's not just a prison. It's a psychological laboratory, built to contain the most dangerous, most violent, and most notorious men in America. Inside, time doesn't move the same way. Days stretch into months, months melt into years, and the mind becomes its own prison. ADX Florence was built in 1994 after a violent uprising in another federal facility left guards dead and the government desperate for control. The idea was simple but ruthless. Create a prison so secure, so controlled that no one could ever escape, or even resist. Every inch of it was designed to crush rebellion before it began. Each cell measures just 7 by 12 feet. The walls are solid concrete, even the bed and the desk are carved from it. There are no bars, only a thick steel door with a narrow slit that barely allows a view of the hallway. The toilet, the sink, the shower, all inside the same tiny space. For 23 hours a day, inmates are locked inside, alone. Their only human contact is the echo of distant footsteps, or the occasional voice crackling through a speaker. 1 hour of recreation means being led, shackled, to a small outdoor cage about the size of a dog kennel. There's no grass, no sky view, just metal mesh and silence. For many prisoners, this place is the final stop, the end of the line. There's nowhere else to send them. These are men who killed guards, led prison riots, or masterminded terrorist plots. The names echo through America's dark history: the Unabomber, Ted Kaczynski; 9/11 conspirator Zacarias Moussaoui; Oklahoma City bomber Terry Nichols; drug lord El Chapo Guzman. All have either passed through or been sentenced to live out their days here. Some will never again touch another human hand. Even seasoned criminals, people who've survived violent gang wars and years of hard time, admit they fear ADX. Not for its brutality but for its silence. There are no fights, no riots, no noise. Just emptiness. It's the kind of silence that gnaws at the edges of the mind. One former warden once said, "It's not designed for punishment, it's designed for control." But for the men trapped inside, control feels like a slow kind of death. Some lose track of days. Others forget what real human voices sound like. Letters from inmates that have leaked to the media describe hallucinations, panic attacks, and the unbearable loneliness that creeps in after years of staring at gray walls. In one documented case, an inmate began talking to insects that crawled through the vents, giving them names because they were the only living things he saw. Another spent so long in silence that when he was finally transferred, he couldn't speak properly anymore. His voice was weak from disuse. Mental health experts who've studied the facility call it a clean version of hell. A place where the body survives but the mind slowly collapses. Everything inside ADX is about minimizing human contact. Food slides through a slot. Showers are controlled remotely. When prisoners move, they're escorted by multiple guards, often in shackles with no eye contact or conversation allowed. There's no cafeteria, no exercise yard, no shared space. Even their mail is screened and censored. They are ghosts living in a concrete maze. The prison's architecture itself plays a psychological game. Every angle, every doorway, every light fixture is designed to eliminate blind spots, so the guards see everything but the prisoners see nothing. Surveillance cameras track every motion. Doors open only through a central control system that can lock down the entire prison in seconds. It's a system so advanced that even the smallest mistake, like leaving a food tray in the wrong position, can trigger alarms. And yet, in this fortress of control, cracks have appeared. Former guards have spoken out, anonymously, about the toll it takes not only on inmates but on the staff. Watching men slowly lose their minds behind walls of silence changes you. Some guards describe feeling haunted by the sound of inmates talking to themselves or screaming in the night, unanswered cries echoing through steel hallways. For prisoners, the only way out of ADX is death, or good behavior. There's a system called step down, which allows inmates to slowly earn privileges, like TV, books, or limited contact, if they follow every rule without fail for years. But very few make it out. Many simply break before they reach that point. One of the most chilling stories comes from Thomas Silverstein, an inmate once labeled the most dangerous prisoner in America. After killing a guard during a riot, Silverstein was kept in isolation for more than 30 years, longer than anyone in U.S. history. In his writings, he described the experience as being buried alive. When he died in 2019, he was still confined inside a world he hadn't left for 3 decades. But Silverstein's story isn't unique. Psychiatrists who've studied long-term solitary confinement warn that even the strongest minds eventually deteriorate. Depression, paranoia, self-harm, and suicide attempts are common. The human brain simply isn't built for isolation. It needs noise, touch, interaction, things ADX deliberately removes. The federal government defends the prison, calling it a necessary tool for handling the worst of the worst. They argue that without ADX, the most violent inmates would endanger others. And it's true, since its creation there's been almost no violence inside. But the question remains, at what cost? What does it mean to control a person so completely that they lose their sense of self? Journalists who've tried to visit describe the difficulty of getting access. The prison is guarded not just by fences but by bureaucracy and secrecy. Few cameras have ever entered. Fewer still have captured footage of what life truly looks like inside. The Bureau of Prisons insists that conditions meet legal standards, yet lawsuits and investigations tell another story, of neglected mental health, extreme isolation, and a system that values security above humanity. Still, for the public, ADX Florence remains a mystery, something between myth and reality. We know the names of those inside, but not the men they've become after years of solitude. When the heavy steel doors close each night, the rest of the world forgets them. But inside, the slow, invisible war between sanity and madness continues. And maybe that's the most terrifying part of all. ADX doesn't just confine people, it erases them. As the sun sets over the Colorado mountains, the prison glows faintly under floodlights. Somewhere inside, a man stares at the concrete wall, counting the lines on his bed frame, trying to remember what the sky looks like. Another day ends in silence. Another life disappears behind a steel door. Because at ADX Florence, the punishment isn't just the sentence, it's existence itself. And for those who've been there, it's easy to understand why even the toughest inmates fear it. The mind breaks before the man. Inside ADX Florence, time is not measured in days or weeks, it's measured in heartbeats and cracks in the concrete. Each second echoes louder than the last. For most inmates, the punishment isn't the cold meals or the steel cuffs, it's the slow, creeping erosion of the mind. Psychologists who have studied life inside supermax prisons describe something called the silent collapse. It doesn't happen overnight. It begins subtly, often unnoticed, until one morning the man staring at the wall is no longer the same man who arrived years ago. At ADX, this transformation is not a side effect, it's part of the design. Every inmate here begins his descent in the same way, a gray jumpsuit, a number, and a door that shuts behind him with a final metallic thud. There's no welcome, no warning. The lights stay on 24 hours a day. Cameras capture every movement, and guards watch through reinforced glass. No one touches you, no one speaks to you. For the first few weeks, many prisoners pace their cells endlessly, talking to themselves just to hear another voice. It's here that the mind begins its rebellion. Some inmates start creating imaginary friends, others relive memories to avoid the emptiness. The absence of human interaction distorts time itself. Without conversation, sunlight, or variation, a week feels like a month. Eventually, the brain begins to create its own company, hallucinations, whispers, movements that aren't real. Psychiatrists call this sensory deprivation psychosis. At ADX Florence, it's just called another Tuesday. One of the most chilling accounts came from a prisoner named Jack Powers, a former bank robber who spent more than a decade in solitary confinement. In his writings, Powers described hallucinating faces in the concrete and voices coming from the vents. He cut himself, tried to take his own life multiple times, and begged for psychiatric help. His letters were filled with despair, written in shaky handwriting, each word a desperate cry for connection. When he was finally released, he was almost unrecognizable, fragile, hollow, and forever scarred by silence. And Powers wasn't alone. A lawsuit filed against the Bureau of Prisons in 2012 exposed what many already suspected. ADX was driving men insane. Prisoners with documented mental illnesses were locked in total isolation, often without proper treatment. Some mutilated themselves with broken glass or metal scraps. Others smeared words on the walls with their own blood, trying to prove they still existed. Guards reported cleaning cells after suicide attempts. Routine, emotionless, efficient. Behind the official reports and government statements, a darker truth emerged. ADX Florence was not just a prison, it was a psychological experiment. Built at the height of America's tough-on-crime era, the Supermax model was designed to break the body's will through control. But at ADX, control extended to the mind. Every sensory detail was stripped away. Even the architecture contributed to mental collapse. The tiny slit windows were angled upward so inmates could see only a fragment of sky. Never another person, never the horizon. Psychologists later called this architectural isolation, a deliberate technique that prevents social orientation. You lose track of direction, of space, of the feeling of being part of a world. Every sound was controlled. The hum of fluorescent lights, the clank of meal slots, the echo of footsteps in an empty hall. These became the rhythms of existence. For some, these sounds were comforting, a reminder they weren't dead yet. For others, they became unbearable reminders of endless confinement. Former staff members, speaking anonymously, admitted that even they felt the psychological toll. One described leaving the prison after years of work and struggling with panic attacks in crowds. Another confessed that the silence of the facility followed him home. He'd wake up in the night imagining alarms or screams. The environment didn't just punish inmates, it infected everyone inside. And yet, for the system, ADX was a success. Violence dropped to nearly zero. Escapes were impossible. The federal government called it the most secure prison in the world. But behind that success lay a hidden cost: the slow destruction of human identity. Each inmate who entered was a person, with memories, family, and fear. Each one who left, if they ever did, carried invisible scars that could never heal. Psychologists who evaluated released prisoners found that many couldn't function in normal society. Some refused to leave their cells during parole. They were too used to being locked in. Others suffered panic attacks in open spaces or around other people. A few begged to return to prison not because they loved it but because they no longer knew how to exist outside it. The most haunting cases, however, were the ones who never made it out. Take Richard Lee McNair, for example, a skilled escape artist who once mailed himself out of a Louisiana prison in a box. When he finally reached ADX Florence, he told reporters that his life ended the day those doors shut. Another inmate, Robert Hood, a former warden, described ADX as a clean version of hell. He admitted that even though it was designed for safety, he believed no one should live there indefinitely. Yet the system continued, indifferent to the moral weight of isolation. Inside, religion often became the only refuge. Some prisoners prayed for hours, not out of faith, but as a form of meditation to keep their minds from unraveling. Others counted tiles or memorized pages of old magazines. Survival required inventing meaning where there was none. Then there were the high-profile inmates, the names that made headlines. The Unabomber, Ted Kaczynski, lived there until his death in 2023. In his cell, he continued writing manifestos, his intelligence intact but his humanity fading. Neighbors in nearby cells included the Boston Marathon bomber, Dzhokhar Tsarnaev, and 9/11 conspirator Zacarias Moussaoui. None of them spoke to one another but all shared the same fate: a world reduced to concrete, steel, and memory. In some cases, inmates who entered sane began showing symptoms of psychosis after just a few years. The walls seemed to move. The light flickered when it didn't. They began to question what was real. Prison psychiatrists later testified that ADX didn't treat mental illness, it created it. Perhaps the most disturbing part was how normal it became. Guards walked past cells where men whispered to themselves, rocking back and forth. Reports of suicide attempts were logged, investigated, and forgotten. The institution functioned perfectly, efficiently, mechanically, like a machine that feeds on human consciousness. For the American public, ADX represented control and justice. But for those who studied it closely, it represented something far darker. What happens when punishment becomes psychological annihilation? Even the architecture whispered the message, "You do not exist here." And yet, despite everything, the system rarely acknowledged fault. Government spokespeople dismissed mental health concerns, citing safety priorities. They pointed to the inmates' crimes, bombings, murders, treason, and asked, do they deserve mercy? For many viewers, that's the moral trap ADX presents. It forces society to confront an uncomfortable question. Does justice justify cruelty? Outside the walls, families of inmates describe the helplessness of writing letters that never arrive, or receiving replies months later, censored and hollow. Mothers talk to their sons through glass and metal phones, trying to recognize the voices of men who no longer sound alive. One mother said in an interview, "It's like talking to a ghost." Within the sterile silence of ADX, ghosts are everywhere. They walk the narrow cells, unseen but not forgotten. Each one carries the same story. They entered as men, they stayed as shadows. And as night falls again over Florence, Colorado, the same ritual repeats. Doors lock with mechanical precision. Cameras glow red in the dark. Somewhere, a man whispers a prayer into the emptiness, hoping someone somewhere can hear it. But no one answers. Because at ADX Florence, the mind breaks long before the body ever does. Escape, scandal, and the price of control. In a place designed to be perfect, silence hides the cracks. ADX Florence was built to be unbreakable, a fortress of concrete and precision where no one could ever escape, riot, or resist. But even the strongest walls can't contain human desperation forever. Beneath the layers of steel and isolation, something unexpected began to happen. The system that was meant to control everything began to turn on itself. For years, officials proudly declared that ADX had never had an escape. And technically they were right. No one had ever slipped beyond the fences or vanished into the Colorado wilderness. But what the reports didn't say was that many inmates had already escaped in other ways. Some escaped through madness, some through death, and a few through defiance. The first major scandal began quietly, buried inside court documents and inmate letters. Prisoners claimed that guards were not just enforcing rules, they were abusing them. Some officers allegedly withheld food, cut off showers, or deliberately provoked inmates to test their reactions. Others ignored pleas for medical help until it was too late. In one case, a prisoner with severe mental illness was found dead after days of screaming into the empty air. The official cause was suicide. The real cause was silence. By the early 2000s, civil rights attorneys and investigative journalists began to dig deeper. What they uncovered painted a chilling picture. ADX wasn't just housing the most dangerous men in America, it was creating them. Lawsuits described scenes of human breakdown, men smearing blood on their walls, others mutilating themselves with shards of metal, and some begging for death. One inmate, in a letter later published by the New York Times, wrote, "I forgot how to talk. I forgot what my mother's face looked like. I forgot what laughter sounded like." Those words spread across the internet like wildfire. For the first time, the public caught a glimpse of what life inside the so-called Alcatraz of the Rockies really meant. And people began to ask questions. If this was America's model of justice, what did justice actually look like? Then came the investigations. The Department of Justice launched quiet reviews. Mental health experts were called in. Whistleblowers, both guards and medical staff, started to speak anonymously about what they'd seen. They described men pacing for days, talking to imaginary people, banging their heads against the walls until they bled. Some guards admitted feeling numb, detached, as if the prison itself had erased their empathy. "You stop seeing them as people," one said. "You just see movement." Despite these revelations, the official response remained the same. ADX is necessary for national security. The prison was too important to fail. It housed terrorists, spies, drug lords, killers, men who could never mix with the general population again. To the government, the suffering was the price of safety. But to the world watching, that justification began to sound hollow. And then, a different kind of scandal erupted, the one that came from outside the walls. In 2015, Joaquin El Chapo Guzman, Mexico's most powerful drug lord, escaped from his own high-security prison through a mile-long tunnel. The news shocked global authorities and forced the United States to confront a terrifying question. Could someone like him ever escape from ADX Florence? The Bureau of Prisons insisted it was impossible. ADX, they said, was escape-proof. But behind closed doors, the warden increased security anyway. They knew that no prison was perfect. Cameras could fail. Locks could jam. Guards could be bribed. The fear of a single mistake haunted the institution. For the inmates, rumors of escape became legend, tiny sparks of hope in a world without light. They whispered about old ventilation shafts, about forgotten service tunnels, about guards who could be bought. None of it was true, but belief itself was a rebellion. It reminded them that the prison's control wasn't absolute. The most infamous escape attempt didn't involve walls at all. It happened in the mind of an inmate named Michael Swango, a former doctor turned serial killer. He convinced himself he could manipulate the system, outsmart the psychologists, and earn his transfer. 4 months, he studied the guards, memorized routines, played the model prisoner. But ADX was built to detect everything. The moment his behavior changed, sensors, reports, and surveillance flagged him. Within hours, he was stripped of every privilege and returned to full isolation. The message was clear: no one outthinks the machine. And yet, even perfection can't prevent collapse forever. In 2012, after mounting lawsuits and global criticism, the Bureau of Prisons agreed to major reforms. They quietly moved dozens of mentally ill inmates to treatment facilities. The step-down program expanded, allowing some to earn transfers to lower security prisons after years of good behavior. It was a small victory, proof that even the toughest fortress could bend under pressure. But for many it came too late. The damage had already been done. Psychologists found that long-term ADX inmates displayed permanent cognitive scars: memory loss, anxiety, social withdrawal. Families described former prisoners who sat in silence for hours, unable to hold conversations. Some committed suicide within months of release. One expert called it learned emptiness, a condition where the mind adapts to nothingness so completely that it forgets how to live. Even the town of Florence itself began to feel the weight of its creation. Locals referred to ADX as the monster on the hill. They drove past it every day, its concrete walls gleaming in the sun, knowing that some of the most dangerous men on earth were only a few miles away. It became both a source of pride and unease, a reminder of what power can build and what it costs to maintain it. Behind those walls, the stories never stopped. Guards retired early, haunted by what they'd seen. Inmates wrote desperate letters that never reached the outside world. Lawyers fought endless battles over conditions that the government refused to call inhumane. And every night, the prison lights burned like cold stars against the Colorado darkness. When the Unabomber, Ted Kaczynski, took his own life in 2023, it reignited the debate. If one of America's most intelligent minds couldn't survive ADX, what chance did anyone else have? Was it justice, or was it simply erasure? The question echoed far beyond Florence. Across the world, human rights groups demanded answers. Even former wardens admitted that ADX might have gone too far. One of them said, "We built a place to contain evil, but maybe we built something evil itself." Yet, despite everything, the prison endures. The fences remain unbroken, the cameras unblinking. New inmates arrive and old ones fade into memory. The system continues, feeding on fear and silence. To this day, no one has ever escaped the physical walls of ADX Florence. But countless men have vanished behind them, psychologically, spiritually, eternally. The story of ADX is more than the story of a prison. It's the story of what happens when control becomes obsession. It's a reflection of a nation that wanted safety so badly, it built a place that kills the mind to preserve the body. In the end, ADX Florence may be the most successful failure in modern history, perfect security at the cost of humanity itself. As dawn breaks over the Colorado plains, the facility stands untouched. The razor wire glitters in the light. The mountains cast long shadows across the compound. Inside, thousands of doors remain locked. A man opens his eyes in a gray cell and wonders for a brief moment if he's still alive. The silence answers him before the day even begins. ADX Florence has never needed violence to inspire fear. Its greatest weapon has always been what it takes away: time, touch, memory, and hope. That's why the men who survive it don't brag about their time there. They whisper about it. Because once you've lived through the Alcatraz of the Rockies, you don't carry stories, you carry ghosts. And that's the terrifying truth about ADX Florence, the most secure, most feared prison in America. If this story made you question what justice really means, don't let it end here. Subscribe to the channel for more real prison stories, true events, and hidden truths they don't show you. Like this video if you made it to the end, and tell me in the comments, do you think a place like ADX should exist, or have we gone too far in the name of safety?